I'm Greg Ostrovich, and welcome to the combined Denver and Boulder Java Users Group meeting. Reminder, we're always looking for speakers, so email Matt, Raible, myself, Chris Woyna, if you're interested in giving a talk or would like to see a particular talk topic. A few housekeeping announcements that we've been doing. If you need the restroom, hopefully you can find it in your house. TechSystems is one of our sponsors. They usually sponsor food, and we appreciate that, but tonight it's whatever's in your pantry or your fridge. And our contact for TechSystems is Courtney Elterman, which is celterman@techsystems.com, and you'll see the slide for TechSystems on our screen. And just a heads up, we are talking with the vendor for Pivotal, the company, to see if we can potentially at some point in the near future start up again with in-person meetings. So we're not sure of their status yet, and we will let you know when that happens and kind of reach out to you to see if that's what everybody wants to do. So there you see the TechSystems open sponsors. We have Apex Systems is another sponsor. Usually they're the beer. Tonight it's whatever's in your fridge or your beer fridge. I'm actually just having coffee tonight, so not as exciting as I usually do. If you have any needs for staffing, reach out to our sponsors like TechSystems, or in this case Apex, to see if they have any positions that you need filled or if you want to work for them. I'm going to jump back for just a quick second. I think JFrog is doing a giveaway. And so we appreciate their sponsorship as well. If there's going to be a giveaway for that, we'll have a QR code that Mike will post in the chat. Develop Intelligence is another sponsor that we have. They're a training company. They give away a thing for Pluralsight every other month, and we really appreciate their sponsorship. Ace Van Wansiel is our most recent contact for that, and as well as Bob Clary. In addition to looking for instructors, they're always looking for people in these technologies to teach or for contract opportunities. Java, Golang, JavaScript, React, DevOps stuff like Kubernetes and Docker, and some other tools. So reach out to them. Another sponsor is Amazon. And Chris Almond or Sam Iyer are our contact points. And on the slide deck, you should see a list of open positions. They have basically a full stack of positions for engineers that they're looking for. Another sponsor is Okta. Not only do they usually sponsor the meeting after the meeting, which we haven't done in a little while, but they help with the meetup. Matt Raible works for Okta, and he is our speaker tonight. So they're actually sponsoring the speaker. So be sure to look for them for some different like OAuth type security stuff and your other needs. They're a really great company, and we appreciate their sponsorship. Another sponsor is NextGen. It's a staffing agency. The current contact is Dana Estland, and reach out to her at dana.estland@nextgeninc.com. They'll list the positions there that they have, or if you're looking to hire. We appreciate all of these different companies sponsoring us because it helps give you things like giveaways, raffle prizes, and things like that, door prizes and things like that. So another sponsor is agilelearner.com. That's Venkat's company. They'll have a conference. I'm not sure when it's rescheduled. They had to cancel that due to COVID concerns. They also have a website, agilelearner.com. They'll have videos. They have other training materials, so be sure and check them out. And we thank Venkat for their sponsorship. Another sponsor is JetBrains. They've been giving away IDEs for probably at least 10 years now, and we really appreciate that. And we give away a couple every month. Follow the instructions for doing the door prizes, and we'll get you hooked up for that. As far as the DJUG meetings go and the BJUG combined meetings, I just want to give a shout out to Matt Raible, who not only is tonight's speaker, but also finds us the speakers, the locations, does the broadcast usually. Also to Mike Suedo, who usually does the door prizes, but is also running the web broadcast tonight. Since Matt is speaking, he'll be doing the behind the scenes stuff. And thanks to Zeddy Chinfang, who does all of our operational stuff, including social media, announcements, and other things like that. This runs because they do all that they do, and I just kind of get up in here in front of you guys and talk. So with that, I also want to bring up the Boulder Java users group. They have some thank yous, and I'm going to have Chris Woyna thank some of their sponsors as well, since we do this as a combined meeting. So Mike, if you could bring Chris up, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Greg. First of all, thanks to Tech Systems. They normally sponsor our food when we're meeting live. And our representative is James Corboy. And, you know, they're a great resource to talk to just to find out about what's going on in the industry, where your career is at. You don't necessarily need to be looking. And of course, they're a great resource also if you're looking to hire. Thanks to Rule for Cybersecurity and Emerging Technologies. They were last year's Colorado Technology Association Award winner. They evolved out of the original Linux DNA of the gurus like Evie Nemeth. And in fact, they're going to be, the Boulder Linux Users Group is also sponsored by them, and they'll be meeting live tomorrow. So if you have any kind of interest in Linux, there's an actual live meetup that you can go to, and they have delicious food catering. Also, No Fluff, Just Stuff, Jay Zimmerman, world-class conferences and training. Agile developer, same for us, Venkat Subramaniam. We have a giveaway for that. The first person to contact me through the website, you get that as a prize. And also JetBrains, IntelliJ, same thing. If you first person to contact me, I'll get you a license. Back to you, Greg. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. So tonight's topic is reactive microservices with Spring Boot and JHipster. Reading from the description on our webpage, microservice architectures, sorry about that, are all the rage in JavaLand. They allow teams to develop services independently and deploy autonomously. Why would you use microservices, you ask? Well, because if you are developing a large complex application and you need to deliver it rapidly, frequently, and reliably over a long period of time, then the Microsoft architecture is often a good choice. I keep saying, I apologize, Matt, I don't know what my deal is. The microservice architecture is often a good choice. Reactive architectures are becoming increasingly popular for organizations that need to do more with less hardware. Reactive programming allows you to build systems that are resilient to high load. In this session, Matt will show you how to use JHipster to create microservices architectures with Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Keycloak, and run it all in a Docker. You will leave with the know-how to create your own resilient apps. So tonight's speaker is Matt Raible, who we really appreciate for all he does for the Jug. He's a well-known figure in the Java community and has been building web applications for most of his adult life. For over 20 years, he has helped developers learn and adopt open source frameworks and use them effectively. He's a web developer, Java champion, and developer advocate at Okta. Also an author. I don't think he said that, but he's wonderful. We really appreciate it. And an amazing blog too. He's a frequent contributor to open source and a big fan of Java, IntelliJ, TypeScript, Angular, and Spring Boot. He's a member of the global JHipster development team and loves classic VWs. Check his blog for some really great micro vans. You can find him online at @mraible and raibledesigns.com. So without further ado, please welcome Matt Raible.
Adjusting things a bit here. I'll bring up my presentation. I do want a fun fact about tonight. This is one of many times that I've presented on JHipster at the Denver Java User Group. The first time I actually did it, I think it was 2015, and it was the first JHipster presentation I ever did. It was when we were back at SendGrid, and I brought my little suitcase and did a little dress-up act. So I'm here to do it again. My name is Matt Raible, and I'm an old-fashioned Java developer. And you know what old-fashioned people like to do? They like to drink a little Old-fashioned whiskey. So this is a local whiskey. Laws used to be, oh, is it Stranahan's? So I like to get into character. A little Laws straight rye whiskey there. We can get all this going. Cheers. So this presentation is based on a blog post that I wrote called Reactive Java Microservices with Spring Boot and JHipster. And you might notice the font there on microservices. That's a Pacifico font. And you might have seen it used on JHipster's website. And so at this point, you might be asking, well, what is JHipster? Well, it started out as a very interesting project. Julian Dubois and a coworker, this is about 2013, were on this project with a bunch of Java developers. And the Java developers basically didn't want to install Node. So they figured out a way that they could invoke Node from Ant. And then they figured out a way that they could generate some backend code and some front-end code. And 6 months to a year later, all of a sudden, JHipster came from that. And by the time JHipster became an actual project that was open source on GitHub, it was a code generator that would generate a RESTful backend with Spring and an AngularJS frontend. Angular didn't exist at the time, neither did React or Vue. And so that's how it started. And over the years, we added support for things like microservices, things like CI/CD to generate that, to generate Kubernetes files, to deploy to the cloud, and a whole plethora of other things. So it basically became a choose your own adventure book, except as a tool. And so to use JHipster, you can install it with npm. You just npm install -g generator JHipster. And you can create a directory and CD into it. That take command is really handy for that. It doesn't make dir and CDs into it. And then you just run JHipster. And that's how it all started. And since then, we've invented JHipster Online, which is similar to start.spring.io, and a JDL option, which is JHipster domain language. So that's how we know we're hip, is because we have our own domain language. I'll get to all that in a minute. So what other things? Oh, yes, many options. So if you run that JHipster command, it'll prompt you. Do you want to generate a monolith, a gateway, or microservices? It'll prompt you to do a reactive architecture with Spring WebFlux. It'll prompt you for different authentication types. In the microservice example, it only supports JWT and OAuth. We used to support UAA, which means you would build your own OAuth server using Spring Security, but we found that Keycloak works just as good for that. So that's been mothballed in the 7.0 release. It'll prompt you for database type, whether you want SQL or NoSQL, the build tool, whether you want Maven or Gradle, and which web framework you want to use. These days, the web frameworks are on the front end, right? They aren't Struts and Spring MVC. They're Angular, React, or Vue. And it'll also prompt you if you want an admin UI, if you want to use a particular boot swatch theme, if you want to use internationalization. I think there's 26 languages that are supported. And if JUnit and Jest aren't good enough for testing your front end, we offer Protractor, Cypress, and Gatling too. And we even have a marketplace where you can add your own extensions. So at this point, you might be asking, wow, there's so many choices. Like, is this the paradox of choice? Remember that book from way back when? It was basically saying, like, there's so many choices that people have a hard time, like, coping with it, and therefore it leads to no choices. And what we like to say with JHipster is we give you the good choices. We've discovered that Couchbase with Spring Boot 2.4 doesn't work so well, so we dropped that. And everything that's in a JHipster project should work when you're prompted for those options. So JHipster Online, I mentioned that at start.jhipster.tech. You can see on the left, there's JDL Studio, which you can use to design your actual application and model it out, as well as JHipster Statistics. If you want to see how many people use Gradle versus Maven or React versus Angular, you can go there. And then if you actually want to save your project that you create, you can go ahead and sign in, and then it will save all the templates. It'll push it to GitHub if you want, or it'll download it for you. And so this is what JDL Studio looks like. You can see there's JDL code on the left. We have an application with a bunch of different configuration settings, and then another one below it. And then on the right, it kind of models that out. I'm not going to go into detail too much there because I will later in the presentation. And so Julian Dubois first committed this project in what was it? October 21st, 2013. And his message was a hipster stack for Java developers. Yeoman plus Maven plus Spring plus AngularJS in one handy generator. And fun fact, Spring Boot didn't even come out till 2014, April 1st. And so JHipster didn't even use it in the beginning. It later adopted it. And the first public release was December 7th, 2013. So just at the end of 2013. Since then, it's grown up quite a bit. We almost had 2 million downloads in 2020. So I'm starting to feel a little more hip. These times, normal times, I would change my shoes, but you know what I'm wearing in these times is slippers. So I'm going to take my slippers off there. And we're going to do a little NBA fun tonight. Going to put on my Air Jordans. My wife got these for me a couple years ago, so I'm going to go ahead and put those on. All right. So feeling a little more hip. Forgot to introduce myself. My name is Matt Raible. I'm a hick from the sticks. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana. No electricity, no running water. 16 years. I had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day, and it felt like it was uphill both ways. I live in Denver. Actually, since you're all from Denver, Centennial down by Parker. You know where that 17-mile house is? I'm right by there. I live here with my beautiful wife, Trish, 2 awesome kids, Abby and Jack. They're much bigger than this picture now. Jack's actually the tallest one in the family, and Abby just graduated from high school. I also have a middle child. His name is Hefe. I bought him off eBay in 2004. I always thought he was going to be done in 6 months, and now he is, but it took 12 years. You could also call him a very expensive obsession. So I work for Okta. My dad calls it Okra, so you can mispronounce it if you like to. We do users as a software service, UAS. That's a terrible acronym. More like OAuth as a service, or even identity as a service. They like to call it the identity cloud. So just talking about Okta is making me feel hip, so I'm going to take off my jacket here. It is ironic that I'm doing this from the hottest room in our whole house. So get this tie off, and maybe that'll make me feel a little cooler. I should have done a regular tie. It would have been easier to untie. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Got my Pride shirt on, Pride Month. To Pride, baby. So let's begin with a brief history of Spring and microservices. There's a lot of things that make up a reactive microservices architecture with JHipster, in particular Spring. And you know, Spring started a long time ago. If you ever touched DJBs back in the early 2000s, I'm sorry. I actually avoided them. The only time I used them was, I think, for a certification test or something like that. But October 2002, Rod Johnson writes J2E Design and Development. Very influential book. I have one on my bookshelf back there. Spring 1.0 came out in 2004. Fun fact, Flex 1.0 as well as JSF 1.0 were released at the same time. And it's pretty cool that Spring's doing the best out of all of those. 2006, Spring 2.0 with better XML. And everyone was like, yay, less XML. Well, then 2009 came along and they were like, you can do everything with Java config. And developers really were like, meh. And so what happened over the next 5 or so years is Spring became one of those things that people described as XML hell. And that's because everyone is configuring their beans in XML rather than using Java config. Well, Spring Boot 1.0 came out on April Fool's Day, I believe it was, 2014, and they offered smarter defaults, starters, and everything in Java config. You could still use XML, but they basically took it from, you know, a basic Spring application with 1,000 lines of code to like 50. And so developers certainly rejoiced at that. And that was what pulled Spring out of XML hell. A year later, Spring Cloud created a lot of the Netflix libraries for doing microservices and made them work with Spring. And that really was a boon for microservices in the Java community. And so many of the initial visionaries of microservices are James Lewis on the top left there, Martin Fowler, and Adrian Cockcroft and Joe Walms. And James Lewis first presented the idea in 2012 at 33rd Degree Conference in Krakow. And his talk was called Microservices Java, the Unix Way. And even before that, way back in 2006 and 7, there was people talking about micro web services. But really, Adrian Cockcroft was kind of the one who took it from SOA to fine-grained SOA to scale. He pioneered the style at web scale, as did Joe Walms and a number of other folks. And then what really was the catalyst, in my opinion, was the article that Martin Fowler and James Lewis published, simply titled Microservices, on March 25th, 2014. And years later, this is still considered the definitive article that defines microservices. So you can see a lot of things coming together here. Spring Boot was released, 6 days after that article. Spring Cloud was released a year after that article. And so in the Java community, not only were they aware that they could do these things, but they had the tools to do them. And so Conway's law is a big part of that article from Martin. And it says any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So what does he mean by that? It basically means that if you're an organization that divides people up by function, UI team, database team, operations team, when teams are separated along those lines, even simple changes can be very difficult. So the UI team, instead of going to the middle tier Java developers or even the database people, will do things in the UI rather than talking to those people. And it's just because getting them to work on something for you might take time and budgetary approval and stuff like that. And so they force the logic into whatever application they have access to. And that's an example of Conway's law in action. So what microservices brings to the table is basically the Unix philosophy of do one thing and do it well. It's easier to work on small things, and no single program represents the whole application. But what you really need to be successful with microservices is not, the Conway's way, or not really, but it's not his way. It's his synopsis of that. If you have an organization that can have a team that can take an idea from an idea all the way to production and maintain it in production, and that's like a 10-person team, then you will likely be successful with microservices. But if you're segregated, into different technology teams, then good luck, probably won't work. So Spring Boot does Java very well. I like to say it's the on-off switch of enterprise Java. Everyone's using it, loves it. Automatically configures Spring whenever possible. Drop Wizard was the first one to put the container right in the app, but Spring is one that really took it to the main masses, and everyone's using it now. There's no code generation, no XML required, and very opinionated pre-configured starter, POMs and jars and all that kind of stuff. And it's even got dev tools to hot reload things as you're going along. And so Spring Framework 5 was released in September 2017. That was quite a while ago, right? That was almost 4 years ago. And it builds on Reactor and Reactive Stream specification. And it created a new reactive runtime and component model called Spring WebFlux. And so Spring 2.0 added WebFlux support and was released March 1st, 2018. So we're still talking years ago, right? And for JHipster, it kind of took us a while to, write all that code that used Spring WebFlux and adopt a Reactive Microservices architecture. That's why we just released support for it in January. So you can see 2018, 2021, took us a while. So people often ask, when should I use Spring WebFlux versus Spring MVC? And what I've seen from studies is that performance differences are negligible unless you're doing a lot of API calls at a scale of at least 500 requests per second, give or take. And so up until that point, if you're at 400 requests a second, chances are Spring MVC, Spring WebFlux, same performance. Spring MVC might even be faster. But when you get up into 600 or 1,000 requests per second, Spring WebFlux is likely to be more performant and use less resources. So you might be wondering, what's the difference? Can we see some code? And that's what I have here. This is from a 21 points health application I developed for the JHipster book. And you'll see this is just a simple method that creates points. Points in this app are, you get 3 points a day. You get a point if you eat well. You get a point if you don't drink, and you get a point if you exercise. So you can get 21 points in a week. And you can see here it's very, sequential. It saves the points It saves it in Elasticsearch there, point search repository, and then it returns the entity, right? There's no chaining of anything. And then if you look at the Spring WebFlux code, there's much more fluid API, right? It saves it and then it flat maps it and then it maps it and it returns the result. So it's non-blocking, and that's the whole idea behind Spring WebFlux and Reactive is it's not holding on to resources while it's waiting for anything to happen on the back end. It's like, you know, asynchronous. It's not synchronous. And so the difference that you might have noticed is the MVC version was 14 lines of code, the WebFlux version 22. So, you know, 33% increase in lines of code. Of course, you could have put those first 3 lines, you know, on the same line that say flat map and map, but then it looks funny. So that is something to consider. It's a bit more complicated in that sense. So an API gateway is an essential part of a microservices architecture, as is service discovery. And so when JHipster first came out with its reactive support in JHipster 6, this is probably 2019, so it wasn't too far after Spring Boot, you know, came out with WebFlux support. We had it for microservices, but not at the gateway. And so if your gateway is blocking, and that's what controls your traffic to your microservices, then, you know, what good is having reactive microservices? And so, you know, what we did was I wrote this blog post on Spring Cloud Gateway. I don't have a link, but I do later in the talk. And it showed how you can have an API gateway that calls a backend car service. And if you use Okta or some OAuth service in there, you can pass the access token between them and, you know, maintain that authentication between those services. The funny story about this, makes me feel hip, is that someone contacted me about this particular image from Volkswagen in Germany. And they said, "How did you know our architecture?" And I was like, I just guessed. So I don't think it's quite like that, but they said it was pretty close. So if I'm pretty hip, I'll put on my bow tie. And so another thing that I recommend when you're doing microservices is to use OAuth and OpenID Connect. And the reason for that is a lot of times what people did before OAuth and OpenID Connect is they would prompt people if they needed to get outside data. So in this example, you're on Yelp.com, you've just signed up for an account, and what would happen in 2005, 2006 is they would prompt you for your Gmail username and password. People would put that in and go get your contacts and then spam your contacts and invite them to join Yelp. And so that's not a great way to do things because there's no guarantee that Yelp discards your password. They might actually hold on to it. And so OAuth and OpenID Connect allow you to delegate the authorization and authentication to somewhere else. So the app itself will never see any of those credentials. And so Yelp, with the new way of doing things with OAuth and OIDC, looks like this. We start with Yelp.com, and instead of prompting you for a username and password, it prompts you to connect with Google. You click on the link, and it goes to an authorization server. In this case, that's accounts.google.com. And you will pass in the redirect that you want to come back to, and then you will set the scopes that you want. In this case, we need the profile information. So OpenID will always be a part of that request, and then profiles to say we need some more information. And then it'll request consent from the resource owner after they've logged in. You know, do you want to give access back to your app? And then it can go exchange a code for an access token and an ID token, and then it knows who you are. So one of the things you should be aware of is OAuth 2.0 has nothing to do with authentication, only authorization. And in fact, in 2009, 2010, what was happening was Facebook and Google and a lot of these people that were implementing OAuth would have a /me, right, /me endpoint for getting the user's information. And so that inspired OpenID Connect to become a standard. OpenID Connect sits right on top of OAuth. It doesn't exist without OAuth, and it provides the authentication and the identification of the user. Another important part of microservices are Docker and Kubernetes, very popular, very widely used. I'm not going to go into them much, except to say that JHipster supports both. And so now the most frightening part of the presentation, at least for me, hopefully not for you, is doing a live demo. And of course, if we're in a room and we're in person and it's on a projector, usually it's not so bad. But what I've noticed is using StreamYard or Zoom, like it really slows things down quite a bit. So I'm just going to do my best to make it work, and hopefully it won't take too long. So I'm going to start by creating microservices with JDL. I'll run the apps. I'll run the E2E tests. Hopefully those won't take too long. And then I'll switch from Keycloak, which it uses by default for OAuth, to Okta. And then I'll run everything with Docker. That last part might be tough, but I got a few smoke and mirrors that might work. So let's exit out of the presentation there. And then I need to stop sharing that screen and start sharing a new one. So back to StreamYard here. And share new screen. Have some whiskey. All right. So if I open up a window here, I was smart enough to create everything beforehand, but I'll go ahead and just close that, and we'll come back to that after I show you how to get started from scratch. So first of all, you will need Java 8, but Java 11 is recommended. So see, I told you to take a while. Java 11. See what I'm running right here. Looks like we're good. OpenJDK 11, Node 14, and then JHipster 7. Come on, baby. Run it. So it's a good thing I got the smoke and mirrors going. Does that take a while? 16 seconds just to print the version. All right, so if you don't have JHipster installed, you can do npm i-g generator JHipster. But obviously I already have installed, so I don't need that. And I will open up my instructions here, or my cheat sheet. So first of all, we have this blog post called Reactive Java Microservices to Spring Boot and JHipster. So everything I talked about today, if you'd rather read it, you can certainly go to this blog post and read it. And you can see all the different steps that are here. And so at the bottom, there's a link to a GitHub repo. That's a little big. And there's a demo.adoc file in it. So this is just a condensed version of that blog post that shows you, the simple steps that I need to do this stuff. So we'll put that on the left, and we'll walk through things a bit. So take Reactive Stack and Git in it. And the reason why I recommend that is in that Reactive Stack directory, we're going to create multiple applications. And so JHipster by default, if it doesn't detect a parent Git repository, it'll create them. And so if at some point in the future you decide you want to check them all into a mono repo, and there's all those sub ones, then you get sub repo problems. So if you do that, Git in it gets around it. So let's look at this JDL here. We have, let's make that a bit bigger. Break up the whole screen. So we have a gateway that's reactive true. And what happened, this is kind of unfortunate, but it happened in January. When we upgraded to Spring Boot 2.4, what we discovered was Spring Cloud dropped support for Netflix Zool. And so Netflix Zool 1.0 or 1.x was blocking, not reactive, not non-blocking, blocking. And so Spring didn't want to use it anymore, and Netflix Zool 2 came out, and it was reactive, but they were still like, we can do better. So they built Spring Cloud Gateway. And so when we upgraded to Spring Boot 2.4 in January in Spring Cloud, what we discovered is we could not have a non-reactive gateway. It just wasn't supported by Spring. So if we wanted to do it, we'd have to downgrade to Spring 2.3 and be stuck there for the rest of our lives. So we were like, okay, if you're creating a gateway, it has to be reactive. So I think this line right here is actually optional. And if you put false, it just wouldn't work, like it would ignore it. So these are just some of the things we override. The package name, the application type is gateway. Authentication type, OAuth 2, you have to have that for all your various JHipster apps. The build tool is Gradle. We're using Vue because it's new in JHipster 7. We use Postgres for the production database here, and service discovery type is Eureka. You can also use HashiCorp's console, and then we have Cypress here because it works a lot better in Protractor. And then the entities on the front end. And interestingly enough, these are just the front end entities, right? So we'll talk to the entities on microservices in the back end, but all the code for those will be on the front end. And then we have a blog that uses Neo4j, also uses OAuth 2, and it's got blog post and tag in there. And then we have a store that uses MongoDB, and everything else is pretty much the same. You do have to specify different server ports, or there'll be conflicts, obviously. And then here's our entities. So these have not only the name of the property, but the type, and then any validation rules. So we try to keep it simple there. We have a blog, a post, a tag, and then a product with just a title and a price, and an image that you can upload, and then many-to-one and many-to-many relationships. A blog can only have one user, and a post can only belong to one blog. And then posts can have many tags, and then some pagination rules here. These are to indicate that it's microservices and to tie all those together. And then this will create Docker Compose files. So if we were to take all that JDL, put it in a file, and run this JHipster JDL reactive-ms.jdl, it would import that and create all those. And it would do in parallel, but it would take a little while. And so what I did is I already did that, right? And it took 4 minutes or so. So we got that in a different window here. And if we scroll up, you can see like all the code being generated. And then we go down, and it tells you some things to how to generate your Docker images and all that. But we can proceed with these steps here. We'll put this on the right, and we'll put this on the left. And so the first thing is to go into the gateway. And the fact that a clear takes so long is worrisome. And we're going to start some Docker containers. So in source main Docker, there's a number of them. ls source main Docker. You can see is JHipster registry, JHipster control center, Keycloak, monitoring with Prometheus, as well as Postgres and Sonar. So if you want to see how many tests there are, it's usually 70% coverage. You could do that. And this realm config is what populates JHipster Keycloak. So it knows the users, it knows the clients, and it basically pre-configures everything for you. And so we can start up Keycloak with JH Keycloak up. That's just a shortcut I have. I'm using OMyZSH, and there's a JHipster plugin for it. And I do have a whole lot of memory for Docker, so I don't know how much Chrome is using, but Docker is set to like 10 gigs of memory and probably 20 gigs of disk space. So yeah, there's a lot there. And the defaults won't work. So I think the default with Docker is like 2 gigs. And if you actually try to start JHipster with that, one of your containers will fail. Just to start Keycloak, it's going to take this long. Oof, could be rough. All right, so we're probably going to have to cut out the Cypress test. This usually takes about a second. So the fact that it's taking 10 seconds might make me change some things. Let's try something else. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to disconnect my big monitor and just use small monitor or just my laptop. I have to reshare my screen here, but I don't want to be painful. I've been painful in real life before at conferences, but never this bad. All right, so Keycloak's up. JH. Oh, I got to reshare my screen, right? So go back to StreamYard somewhere here and share my screen. That one there. And if you can add it back in, Mike, there we are. All right, so we'll put that on the left and put this on the right. JH registry up. Hopefully that's a little better. Not 57 seconds. All right, that was much better. So again, left, right, clear, and then we got all these commands. So Postgres, we don't need Postgres. We just need the registry, and then we can start up the gateway. Cradle W, and then while that's starting up, I'll go into the blog, and that has Neo4j, so JH Neo4j. And like I said, you can also do the Docker Compose F source main Docker Neo4j up like that. That's another way to do it. But the problem is it will you have to do the daemon right -d. So I'm JH Neo4j up. Not found. Wow, why is that happening? I don't know. Let's try the store. So JHmongo up. Log might not start up. What? Network not found. What about clear? Good old demo gods, Docker PS. So we got those two running, but no Neo4j, huh? Oh, we'll have to do it without those microservices. Tough to do a microservice demo when you can't run the microservices on JHmongo or Neo4j up. Keep trying it until it makes you insane. Nope. Remove orphans. Nope. Well, you know, the beauty of reactive microservices is things don't actually need to be up and running to start the services. So this is saying it's got a problem with something about connecting probably to the registry. Let's see if the registry is up. So we'll make that a bit bigger and localhost 8761. This is just like Eureka's registry. It's not quite up yet. So we can look at that with another command. So in the gateway directory, you can do JHregistry logs. Good. Well, let's pull up Docker here. Little live debugging. At some point, I'm just going to say, oh, well, the demo failed and move on, right? The good news is I do have a YouTube video that shows it all working. So when I'm recording it with Camtasia, it's not quite as bad as, you know, using StreamYard, evidently. Back there, Docker Compose. That one's starting. Keycloak. That one looks good. There's Neo4j. Stopped. Well, let's try starting it again. Start, baby. Oh, there's a delay, and then you click, and then it turns into a stop button. No, container already started. Well, let's try back here. So, sorry about the live debugging. Get to learn all this stuff when you use JHipster. Oh, gosh darn it. I won't subject you to too much more. Neo4j's up. That's great. JHregistry, or you have to do Keycloak first because the registry won't start if Keycloak's not up, at least when you're doing OAuth and microservices. So that should be up. JH Keycloak logs. Okay, it's starting up. So now JHregistry up. Docker PS. We got Keycloak. We got the registry. How are we doing over here? Not quite yet. That one's good. That one looks like it's starting. So it's just taking a while because StreamYard, I guess. At least I got my big monitor out of the way, so things aren't going so bad. So bear with me. We got until like 7, right? So it should be plenty of time. And I got whiskey, so if you don't have whiskey, maybe you should get some. Come on, JHipster. You can do it. My fan's like going a million miles an hour right now. Okay, so now, all right, and it redirects us to Keycloak to log in. And we can see that nothing else is running, right? Because we weren't able to start those. So let's try Neo4j again here. Nope. Well, we'll try just starting the blog and maybe the store. JHmongo up. Oh, we gotta go to store directory. Hide that. Okay, well that one started. Why isn't Neo4j? Maybe it's already started. Well, we'll do this, and then we'll stop this one, and then we'll start up the gateway. So you can see that microservices is really complicated. You might not want to do it by yourself. That's what I'm learning. So things are starting to come online here. I don't know what that was up with starting everything, but you notice I really didn't do much. So maybe it was running before, who knows? And you'll notice this npm install. So that's only happening on the gateway. On the back end, they did an npm install, but it happened so fast you didn't see it. And the only reason those backend microservices even have npm install associated with them is because JHipster is a code generator and it's based on npm. So if you want to generate code or entities for those backend microservices or even like CI/CD pipelines, you would need JHipster in those projects. So that's why things are set up that way. So things are starting to start up. Let's see what the registry says. We got the blog and the store. So the blog is probably mad that Neo4j isn't started up yet. Let's see if we can start it here with Docker. Otherwise, we'll just like ignore that it's a thing. Why didn't you open the existing one? So Neo4j. Does it started? Okay, well, we'll give up on it. All we really need is the gateway. We go to localhost 8080. Should be our gateway. We can sign in, admin, and we're logged in, right? And if we were to go to product, that should work because that stores up. So we like beer, and it's $10 because, you know, it's pricey. Pretend like we're in Norway. And then if we were to go and add an icon here, you can see you can even upload images and all that works. So I think if we go to like the blog, it might not work when we add one. Admin's blog, admin. That's because Neo4j is down or that's not working. But if I wasn't on StreamYard, I promise it would work. It's never really failed for me in this weird way before. But if you were in the gateway directory, you can go to, you can run npm run e2e. So this uses Cypress to verify that everything that you created actually works. So not only your entities, but the CRUD for those entities, the authentication, the failed authentication, you know, pretty much everything. So I won't run this for too long because obviously, you know, that blog, those tests are going to fail. But just to show you, like going through, you know, and testing the basic UI, it's pretty cool. So I like it. It's a nice feature, but it won't work when we get to those. So we'll exit out of there and go back to our instructions here. So now we want to change it. Or one of the things I wanted to, note is that with Keycloak, it works great for development. I love it. I have no problems with it. But when you get to production, there's all kinds of other considerations you need to think about. Like, how did your users get in? You don't want to use JHipster's, configuration because we put an admin user in there, which is the worst password in the world, right? And user, like you don't want to pre-register clients. You don't want to pre-register users, groups, all of that. And so, what we've done with Okta is we've made it so you can use Okta to pre-register all that, and it works really well. But you're welcome to take Keycloak into production, and if you add the right roles and configure the right things, it'll all work with JHipster. And the cool thing about Spring Cloud Gateway is all you need to do to relay an access token from the microservice where they logged into the gateway downstream to the other microservices is this token relay filter. So if it was a properties file, it'd be one line of code, but since it's YAML, we got 5 lines of code. So what we can do on the gateway is we can, we'll stop this one. We'll stop the store as well. And we can even stop Keycloak. We will configure this for Okta. So we have an Okta CLI. You can get it from cli.okta.com. And you can type Okta apps create JHipster. So there's native JHipster support, and we'll call it Reactive MS. And it'll prompt you for the redirect URIs. And these redirect URIs are already coded into JHipster, so you have to use them. If you're familiar with Spring Security and its OAuth support, you might be wondering why the end of this ends with OIDC instead of Okta, because it actually has Okta built in. But the reason we don't is because we want to switch between Keycloak and Okta, and we don't want to make you change any code. So we just picked OIDC instead of Okta. And this right here is so you can use it with the registry as well. So we'll just accept the defaults, and then same for the logout redirect URIs. And what that'll do is go out to Okta, create the actual application. You'll see it gives us back a client ID here, and then it creates the groups, role user and role admin, which JHipster expects, and it adds a groups claim to the ID token, so you can do all the RBAC-based authentication and authorization. And then I already have those created, so it didn't create any new ones. And it wrote this .okta.env file. So if I cat that, you'll see it's got Spring Security's properties for issuer, which is set to this for Okta, and then a client ID and a client secret. So I can source that okta.env, and then I can start up the gateway again. And then we'll also need to restart the registry. So before I do that, else the registry won't connect to Okta. Well, and actually, there's a step here that I missed. So I've set up the gateway for Okta, but one of the cool things is in the registry, we actually support distributing the configuration to all the microservices. So in this gateway source main Docker central server config localhost all that, we can add these properties here. So if we were to go here and go one level up and DI that, you can see there's nothing down here, but we can add these. And then we'll copy them from this env file. And so this makes it so we don't have to set it as, environment variables. We can just have this YAML file that distributes it. So as long as my VI skills are up to date, shouldn't be too bad. Client ID. And client secret. And the worst thing is the copy and paste. That'll mess you up if you don't get those right. So now that we have our registry right and we don't have it running down, when it starts up, it will distribute that to all the microservices. So JH registry up. Oh, we need to be in the gateway directory. Start this one. And I might as well try to get the blog up and running again. Got time. JH Neo for J down. Maybe that'll work. And then start it up again. JH Neo for J up. I feel it. It's gonna work. Yes. Right, and then Gradle W that one. And then go into our store. Gradle W that sucker. And we should be good to go using Okta. So it does use Liquibase. I didn't mention that, to create the tables and to create all the columns. And when you generate new entities, it creates new Liquibase files that creates new tables and relationships between them. Obviously, the relationships are set up by whatever persistence framework we're using. This is probably having trouble talking to registry because it's not up yet. Let's see here. Is it up? Nope, not yet. Hopefully there's not a typo in my YAML file. Let's see what's going on. JH registry logs. Like it's just still starting. There we go. So now if we refresh, we'll see if things are signing in. You'll notice instead of Keycloak, it redirects me to Okta there. As long as I remember my information, we're good to go. So now we're logged into the registry and the gateway's up. The store's not quite up yet. The blog is having issues. It's trying to talk to Keycloak for some reason. So let's try again. Maybe the registry wasn't up and that's why it failed. But we can go to the gateway and localhost 8080. Since we restarted it, right, the session's gone. But if we click sign in, guess what? Single sign on. Right, so since we already logged into the registry, Okta already had a session for us. Now we're logged into our app that way. And it looks like that's coming up. We can go to product. Our beer should be in there. Yep. And then looks like the blog's still starting up, but this is the first time the blog is actually, started. So I'm pretty excited about that. And if we were to go to blog here and do admin's blog, now it's going to work. Maybe not. Looks like I got too cocky. Oh, well. Well, you saw how it worked, and I don't know why Neo4j has issues it never did before this. So just a demo gods thing. If we were to look back to our instructions, the next steps are to kill the registry and restart it. We did that. But you can also use Cypress with Okta. The difference is you have to set the username and password because we expect them to be admin by default if you're using Keycloak. And so if you do want to run it with Okta, you can do that. And then the thing that I won't show you just because memory usage isn't great is stopping all your Docker instances and actually building the Docker containers and then running everything. The only difference is you put that configuration in a different place because it's for the JHipster registry running in Docker. So I actually will configure this and I'll start in the background. And if I remember at the end, we'll come back and see it all running. So what we can do is we can stop this. And I already built the Docker containers earlier, so I won't subject you to that pain. This should only take a minute. Let's see. So the gateway will open up an IntelliJ. And then we'll open up this Docker compose and code. I want to see how many different IDEs and how much memory I can get going. I mean, I stopped everything now, so it shouldn't be that much, right? I can stop all the Docker containers too, and then should have all kinds of memory. So in this central server config, it's very similar to where we configured it for, that Docker registry before. And then in IntelliJ here, it's going to load that up and index the heck out of it. So that might take a while. We could go for the old VI approach. No, it's coming. Come on, baby. I need one of those M1 machines, obviously, to run StreamYard and do this kind of stuff. Because I got 64 gigs and it ain't great for these kind of demos. Well, it's not in config, it's in source, main, the Docker, essential server config, localhost config, there we go. So it's these credentials, and then we put them in code in the same file here. Then what we can do, as long as our Docker files are built, we don't have anything running, let's exit, Docker PS. So nothing's running, we can go to Docker compose, which JHipster generated for us with that original JDL. And we can do Docker compose up. And so you can also pass in -d, and then it'll run as a daemon, and you can't see it, but I like to see, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 container startup. And we don't need Keycloak because we configured it for Okta, but I forgot to delete that out. So those will all start up in the proper order, and it'll run everything for us. So in the meantime, I'll go back to our presentation here, and let's see, play that. So in this GitHub repo, octadev/Java microservices examples, there's a number of different examples. I'll open it up here. You can see there's Spring Boot and Cloud. So that's just bare bones Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, setting up a Spring Boot microservice and using Spring, Cloud with Netflix Eureka. And I believe it probably uses Zool in this example because it's, an older version of Spring Boot. And then Spring Cloud Gateway, that's using the reactive stuff. That's very similar to what we have, but it's very bare bones. It doesn't have all the UI like JHipster does. And then this JHipster is just doing JHipster 6 microservices, which aren't reactive. And then this reactive JHipster is the one you saw today. And then JHipster Kubernetes is based on a blog post that I recently wrote that shows you how to take this same architecture that we just created and put it up on Google Cloud. So reactive microservices with Spring Cloud Gateway is that blog post that I wrote. And if you're interested in how, Spring Cloud Gateway communicates and does its, forwarding of the access token, you can see that. It's very simple and not too complicated, not much, data in there. And I'm feeling pretty hip after my somewhat successful demo. I mean, the Docker Compose stuff could still work. You never know, right? So you learned about Conway's law, you learned about microservices, you learned about how they're very popular in the Java space because we really got the tools to do them back in 2014 and 15. You learned about JHipster and how it offers a lot of options and a lot of possibilities for building and deploying your apps. Spring Cloud makes everything possible from a microservices perspective, and you saw how easy it was to set up JHipster with Okta. So this blog post that this whole presentation is based on is at that URL there. I'll give you a URL to download the slides at the end. And the one I mentioned on Kubernetes, I just published last week. It took me a month to write. So a lot of that was because I wrote it, in a week or two and then sent it to a Kubernetes expert friend of mine. And he was like, don't do it that way. He's like, do it this way. So don't use Docker Compose, use Minikube. And one of the big things I'm proud of in this post in particular is how to do secrets in Kubernetes, because what I found is a lot of people do, well, first of all, most people do them in external things like Spring Vault or Amazon's equivalent, but a lot of people do them with Kubernetes secrets too. And Kubernetes secrets are just base64 encoded strings in YAML files. So if you check that stuff into your GitHub repo and it's public, well, it's not really a secret. So I show how to use sealed secrets instead. You might be asking about Kotlin. So we talked about Java microservices. What about Kotlin? Well, the good news is there is a Kotlin version of JHipster. So you can install npm install -g generator JHipster Kotlin. And then instead of typing JHipster, you type Keyhipster. And so that's pretty slick. Unfortunately, this particular JDL that I used doesn't quite work with Kotlin. So I'm still trying to fix that. And you might be asking about Loom. So Project Loom is something that's coming in the not very near future, but future. I don't think it's part of JDK 17, but maybe 18 or 19. But the whole idea behind Loom is to make threads less expensive and therefore be able to do reactive programming type of concepts with regular non-reactive code. So if Project Loom is successful, from what I've seen from a lot of its practitioners and the people that work on it, the reactive programming thing will go away. That's kind of a tall thing. I don't know if that'll happen, but keep an eye on it. In the meantime, what I recommend is learning these reactive concepts, because for me, it really taught me a lot about like the Java Streams API and how you can chain things together and all the flat mapping and filtering and collections and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's useful knowledge to have. And then, maybe if Project Loom is really successful, then, we won't need it anymore, but still fun to learn. So you might be asking, what's next for JHipster? Well, we got Spring Boot 2.5, which just came out. So there's some work to do to make that work. One of the things that I discovered with JHipster is we're doing everything kind of wrong on the front end. So I didn't really talk about it, but it was a Vue front end that we created, and it generated all the screens for that on the gateway. And so if you changed any of those fields in the back end and the UI needed to be updated, you would have to do it on the gateway. And therefore, you would have to deploy that microservice, let's say it's the blog microservice, and the gateway again, because you updated the UI for the gateway. And so that's not really microservices, right? Because each thing should be their own entity. And what I've seen a lot with JHipster is people are using it to just do backend microservices, and they aren't using it so much for the front end. And so they haven't experienced this problem. But in reality, you should be able to deploy that blog backend. It should have the UI with it, and the gateway should suck it in somehow. And so with Webpack 5, there's a thing called Module Federation that allows you to do that. And basically, you configure Webpack to say, hey, this library isn't here right now, but when you start up at runtime, suck it in. So you can have remote libraries, and that will allow the gateway to pull in the blog's code over here. And you might even be able to develop the blog independently without starting everything, which would be nice if you don't have a super fast machine. I'm also very interested in GraphQL. So I'm interested in making that happen on JHipster's backend and front end. Not a lot of the team members are interested in it. So hopefully I can use some sponsor money from Okta and then, go from there. So one of the biggest things I think JHipster is useful for is knowledge. When I was first encountering JHipster, I was an independent consultant, and I would always, work with clients, and they would already have applications. They didn't need a brand new application like JHipster will create. And so what I would do is I would generate a JHipster app, and then I would see how WebSockets worked, for instance, with Spring Security and Spring MVC. And JHipster showed that because you can choose WebSockets as an option. And so it's very useful for knowledge and just seeing how things are done. And it also has 70% test coverage, both on the back end and on the front end. So your apps are pretty well tested from the beginning. So if you need to know how to test things or mock things, it's got a lot of that knowledge in there. I wrote a book on JHipster. I wouldn't recommend downloading it because it's out of date. It's on JHipster 5, and we're up to JHipster 7. So if you want to know the general concepts and maybe not exact code, then take a look at it. But I do plan to update it soon. I just haven't had time lately. So you can learn more about Spring Boot from their guides. They have excellent guides that get updated with every release. JHipster.tech is the main JHipster website that has some videos, some tutorials, as well as all our release notes and how-tos for Kubernetes and Docker and all that. And then if you want to learn more about Okta's APIs, we allow you up to 15,000 active monthly users for free. So that should get you off the ground and be able to start a successful business before you're paying anything. And then if you're like me, the lead developer on my team is often Stack Overflow. That's often because I work alone, and they're the ones that know the answers. So JHipster has a tag on Stack Overflow, and we request that if you have questions, and it might not be a bug, that you ask there first, and then we'll tell you if it's a bug or not. So on the Okta developer blog, we have numerous tutorials on Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, how to do it with OAuth, and even Quarkus and Micronaut. And JHipster has support for Quarkus and Micronaut as well. It even has support for .NET and Node.js on the back end. So it's very vibrant that way. Our handle is OktaDev on Twitter and GitHub and even LinkedIn. So if you want to follow us there, that'd be great. And my action for you is to try JHipster. Try JHipster 7. You can install it with that command at the bottom there and see what you can learn. And of course, use the source. All the source I showed you today is up there on Java Microservices examples. You can regenerate everything that I did using JHipster, JDL, Reactive-MS. So thank you for watching today. Keep in touch with me on my website on raibledesigns.com. You can find me on mraible on Twitter. The presentation should be on Speaker Deck. I scheduled it to publish at 6 o'clock, and so it should already be up there. And then most of the code I write these days is on OktaDev. And I do have one last thing in celebration. So this will make me feel the hippest. You see the guy who got the MVP yesterday? That's right. Joker, baby. Got my Joker jersey. Got my Nuggets hat. Drop my green screen for the cool background. And may the auth be with you.
That was a great presentation, Matt.
Thank you.
There's a couple questions in chat that I saw. I'm going to see if I can get them to show. Nope, wrong one. Okay, so random guy asked, can we deploy the developed application in AWS or in Red Hat OpenShift?
Yeah, so those are just Kubernetes engines, right? Like GKE. So the blog post that I mentioned shows you how to deploy it to Google Cloud, but it's really just a kubectl, -f apply. And so so that should work on any Kubernetes engine. If you do want specific generators for those particular services, there is an AWS containers generator. But the problem is with JHipster, we get people that come in and contribute something like the AWS generator, and then they go away, and people file bugs against it and they don't respond. And so what happens is we tend to remove them if no one's willing to support it. So unfortunately with this one, we're in the process of removing it because no one's supporting it. So it might still work, but that's a problem. And OpenShift, I think, is in a similar boat. where someone contributed something and then they're not willing to maintain it. So it might still be there, but it might not. But at one point we had support for both of those, like out of the box.
Okay. And then another question was about how OIDC differs from SAML.
SAML. So I love this question because here's the thing, like you wouldn't implement SOAP, right? You wouldn't implement WS star like we did in 2005 and 2006. And guess when SAML came out? 2005, 2006. So SAML to OIDC is like SOAP to REST. So if you're going to develop web services these days, you're probably going to use REST or maybe GraphQL. But SAML, like, come on. Like SAML's 2006, before iPhones, before any devices came out. 2009, 10, 12 is like OAuth and OIDC. So don't use SAML if you can help it. And especially for front-end frameworks, they just don't support it, but they do support OIDC. And, you know, big companies, Facebook, Google, Microsoft are all behind OIDC and OAuth. So try to do that, not SAML.
Okay. And scrolling through, and there's a lot of thank yous and good jobs, but I don't think there are any more questions.
Oh, hold on. Let me see if my thing actually started up here. I just want to log in and see, because I did the Docker Compose. I won't share my screen, but maybe I should. Yep, it all worked. So, you know, one last screen share here, just to show it working.
All right, just to prove to chat that it actually worked.
Right, that Docker Compose ended up working. And, you know, it's still running back here. That's probably my first successful, like, everything worked demo.
All right, and do we have any more announcements?
Oh, there is something in the chat here that we are taking July off, right? So we wanted to kind of tell everyone that. We're just giving you all a summer break, so there won't be a Denver jug in July. But August, we have Ken Sipe. In September, we have Daniel, who's talking about Spinnaker and Kubernetes. So we got some pretty good talks coming up this, you know, later this summer and fall.
Okay. Well, I think that's everything. So thanks again, and I guess we'll see everyone back in August.
All right. See y'all. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everybody.